So, hi, everybody. I'm Towan Isom, and welcome to this amazing podcast where we're going to be discussing Bitcoin. This is a topic that many people are confused about, including myself. And so, what typically happens is when anyone brings up the topic Bitcoin, I excuse myself from the conversation. Like, I'm just like, oh, I'm going to go over here and get some pretzels or something, or get a glass of wine, because for me, I don't feel comfortable when I'm in spaces and I can't contribute to the conversation. So John is going to solve all that because he's going to get me together and give me all of us, the basic knowledge on what Bitcoin is, why we need it, what's happening with our currency system, and why Gen Z is so committed to this new form of currency. So without further ado, we have a lot to unpack in this episode. Let's get started. Hi, John.
Hey, how's it going? Good morning.
It's going great. Good morning. I'm glad to have you. So where are you? Where are you sitting now? It looks all nice and sunny.
I am currently in San Salvador, El Salvador.
Oh, goodness. Love it. What made you go to El Salvador?
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Oh, Bitcoin. That's a great way to start the conversation. So tell us a little bit about yourself and just everything from how you got engaged in Bitcoin and why you continue to stick with it and educate others on it.
Yeah. So I've been in the space for about 12 years now, a little bit more than 12 years. So I was previous to Bitcoin, I was an activist and someone who, looked at the world as an opportunity to looked at the world and tried to see how we could do things better. And I was very aware of things like censorship, right? Because of that. And in 2013, in April 2013, I read an article about what was called a bank bail-in in Cyprus in the European Union. Cyprus had some difficulty with making some financial obligations. And in response to that, they actually went into everybody's bank account in the country and took a small percentage out. It was like 6 or 7% in order to pay back their financial obligations. So I read that article about this, and there was a throwaway line that everybody was upset about it in Cyprus, but Bitcoin users were unaffected. And I was like, who's unaffected by this? So then I looked into it, and it was like this aha moment, like, oh, wow. So the reason why Bitcoin users were unaffected was because no government, no one can take your Bitcoin, right? Like if you hold Bitcoin yourself, no one can take it. You have complete control over it. And if you hold dollars, euros, whatever it is in a bank, a lot of us presume that it's safe there. And in 99% of the time it is, but it's not 100%, right? With Bitcoin, it's 100%. So that kind of started me on a path to really look into Bitcoin as something with really entrenched censorship resistance properties, which was very attractive to me. Again, like money is speech. So if you could censor how people spend their money, or if you could, control how people spend their money, then you could control what they think. So that was kind of my entry into Bitcoin 12 years ago.
So how does the process of Bitcoin work? Because I think that's like when people can't get their head around it, then they tend to not want to participate. But I think if people were to understand it, and based on what you just said, I'm concerned about that because I could totally see the government. I'm not like a anti-government person, but I do recognize like the gaps within the government and things that could be done better. But I do believe strongly that when people understand Bitcoin, because more and more people, especially when you look at Gen Zs, are definitely proponents of Bitcoin. But I think Gen X and baby boomers and maybe some millennials, they really struggle with not understanding what it is and how it works compared to regular dollar currency, for example, in the US.
Yeah. So a couple of ways to answer that question. The way that Bitcoin works is essentially it's a ledger, right, of additions and subtractions. So the same as if you have a bank account or a PayPal account, whatever it is, with a dollar balance, and you send, say you have 100 units, $100, and I send you $10, right? The ledger changes and it takes 10 away from my account. So now I have 90 and it adds 10 to your account. So the total number stays the same, but there's an addition and a subtraction. So all Bitcoin is at its core is just a ledger of additions and subtractions of who owns Bitcoin, right? And like which wallet controls which Bitcoin. And the way that Bitcoin is, not to add some complexity to this, but the way that Bitcoin is introduced is through mining, right? So the way that Bitcoin is mined, effectively Bitcoin is backed by energy. So the more energy, you run a program on your computer. At this point, it's super specialized machines that do this. I mean, you could run it on your laptop, but it's hard to compete with these super specialized machines. So you run a program, and the program is pretty energy intensive. It does some calculations. Basically, I mean, this is an oversimplification, but it's guessing a number, and the first person to guess the number correctly, to solve this equation correctly, gets rewarded. And that also secures the network because you're relaying the transaction. So that $10 or 10 Satoshis, 10 Bitcoin that I'm sending from one account to the next, they'll process that. As part of that, they get to process that if they solve the problem first. And if they solve the problem first, then they get an amount of Bitcoin. At this point, every block, which is 10 minutes on average, you get about 3 Bitcoin. And it used to be 6, and then it was 12 and 25 and 50. It actually gets cut in half every 4 years. But that is how new Bitcoin is introduced into the system, which is also to draw a contrast with how new dollars are introduced into the system. Like how new dollars are introduced into the system is pretty opaque. I think very few people could tell you how new dollars are introduced into the system. And literally no one can tell you when new dollars will be introduced into the system. With Bitcoin, every 10 minutes, there's 3 Bitcoin added, right? So you know how many Bitcoin are added per day, per week, per month, per year. You know how many Bitcoin there will be in circulation 10 years from now, 100 years from now. You have no idea how many dollars there will be in 10 years or 100 years. So it's actually a much more logical and predictable system. And the reason why that is, and I'll use a quote to compare the two systems. And when I say dollars, I'm really just talking about like all government currency. It could be euros, right. It could be anything. Bitcoin is rules, not rulers. And the dollar is rulers, not rules.
Interesting. Wow. So it is so essentially the Bitcoin is more stable than the current currency system.
It is more stable in the sense that it's the monetary policy issuance is predictable and it's set, right? Like there are no rulers in this case that have the authority to change that because it's a decentralized system. So in that sense, it's a lot more stable. In the sense of purchasing power, it's less stable. There's more volatility currently because it's new, right? Like Bitcoin has been around for 15 years. So it's in what's called the price discovery phase. Nobody actually knows what it's worth. I think that it's worth a lot. I think that it's worth way more than dollars. Like to have a predictable, borderless, censorship-resistant global financial system, I think is incredibly valuable to humanity. So I think that it's worth way more than what it's currently priced at. But then there are other people that either because they don't understand it or they do and they just come to a different conclusion, they think it's worth less. And there's not a firm consensus there. So we don't know. Whereas the dollar is, why is a $20 bill worth more than a $10 bill? Because they told us. because they told us it's worth more, right? Like,
wow. So the more people become users of Bitcoin, then is it fair to say the more the value will start to be assessed?
right. Yeah. A really interesting thing about Bitcoin is that it has an inelastic supply. So there's a hard cap on how many Bitcoins will ever exist, and that is 21 million. Up until
Really?
now, yeah, up until now. So I mentioned earlier that the mine-in reward started out at 50 Bitcoins per block, and it's currently about 3 Bitcoins per block. Every 4 years, it gets cut in half. So effectively, like, the inflation of Bitcoin is always decreasing. So with time, that won't change. Even as demand increases, even as more people learn about Bitcoin and more people want to use Bitcoin, to hold Bitcoin, to save in Bitcoin, to use Bitcoin, whatever it is, they want Bitcoin. As demand increases, the supply is inelastic. It does not respond to the demand, which is atypical. So if you think of like basically anything else, right? If you're, you make cell phones, and lots of people want to buy your cell phones, whatever your product is.
Going to go up.
Well, yes, the price would go up, but also they would increase the supply. So a good example of this, because it's money, might be gold, right? So the inflation rate of gold is about 2% per year. The higher the price of gold, the more incentivized miners, in this case, like real world miners, physical miners, are to develop gold mines, right? If the price of gold is super high, then more gold will be introduced into the system. If the price of gold goes very low, then the mines will shut down, right? So there's a direct relationship between demand and supply with most things in the world today. Bitcoin is pretty exceptional in that the supply is inelastic to demand.
Wow. So are you, and this is just basic questions, are you able to pay like your mortgage with Bitcoin?
Right now in the United States, I don't know the answer to that question. In the past, the answer was no. In the future, it's yes. So they've actually, the housing authorities in the US, just in the past couple of months, have declared that Bitcoin should be able to be used as collateral, right? When you're getting a mortgage. Really? This is very new. This is this year in 2025. I don't know what the timeline of when they announce that to when it actually becomes effective is. So at this moment in August 2025, I actually don't know. At the start of the year, the answer was no. At the end of the year, the answer will be yes.
Oh, this is amazing. So they're starting to incorporate Bitcoin, and not necessarily like that's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, but introduce it in different ways. I know you're in El Salvador, of how people can pay their bills and have it in their everyday lifestyle.
Yeah, it will get easier with time. So it will get easier because of regulation, right? Because like the government now, in this particular case with housing in the US, says that it could be used as collateral. It will also, and I think more importantly, get easier because the user experience will improve. As more people use it, there's just more data to be like, oh, how can we make this easier for the end user? Also, as the price goes up, there's a stronger incentive for more people to enter the space and innovate and make those things easier for people to use.
Gotcha. If you were to say now, what percentage would you say of people, just rough estimates, actually use Bitcoin?
It's very low. And this is contextual, so it depends on where you are. But
what country you're in, I would imagine.
Yeah, so here in El Salvador is a bit of an outlier because more people use it as a medium of exchange. So money has a variety of different properties. The two main ones here are medium of exchange. So that's like I have A and I want B, you have B, but you want C, and I don't have that, right? It's the double coincidence of wants. So you need something in the middle that allows us to make that exchange, which is what money is. So that's a medium of exchange. And then the other important, or there's multiple, but another important aspect of money is a store of value, something that will hold its value into the future, will not be worthless, right? Like I don't know, a mango is a terrible store of value because like in the future it's just not worth anything, because if you just hold on to it, then it rots, right?
Right. That's a great analogy, actually.
Yeah. So let me speak to the US, which is where I'm from, and I'm pretty familiar with the US. Most people in the US use it as a store of value. Few people use it as a medium of exchange. Here in El Salvador, a good number of people who use Bitcoin use it as a store of value, but a higher proportion of them use it as a medium of exchange. So when you say how many people are using Bitcoin in the US, rough numbers, I actually was just reading a study this morning about this. I think there's 48 million Americans that claim to own Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. So that's 1 in 6. So that's less than 20%. So like, I don't know, maybe 17, 18%.
That's still a lot, though.
That's still
a lot.
Yes. So that's all uses. From that number, how many people are using that, not just buy it and hope that the value goes up. I would put that less than 1% of Americans. And part of that is regulation, right? So there's tax implications. If you bought Bitcoin for $100 and then it's $200, then as the law is now in the United States, you should pay capital gains of $100, because it went from $100 to $200 when you spend that Bitcoin. They will likely later this year, and this is pretty typical for other assets, but Bitcoin is new, so it takes some time. But they'll add an exemption, below $600, below $10,000, whatever it is. Then you don't have to think about capital gains, and probably even longer term, there won't be any capital gains. Just the same way as if you go on vacation to Europe and you bring back euros and the exchange rate changes, you don't have to worry about tax implications when you use those euros, and trade them in at the bank or something like that. You do with Bitcoin now, technically. So that has been an impediment for people to use it as currency in the US, but it looks like that is starting to change.
Do you think, I know you follow a lot what's going, since you're an American, do you think if you had to say one administration kind of grasp Bitcoin more than the other, would you, because I know there was just some conversation before about the Biden administration not fully embracing Bitcoin. And again, that's because I think a lot of people don't have familiarity with it. Versus now under the Trump administration, they seem to be a little bit more savvy in trying to integrate Bitcoin more and just in the US and setting policy. And now looking at ways we can engage Bitcoin in our particular system in the US.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. So to me, it seems pretty clear that one of the main reasons why Trump won the last election and Harris lost was that Trump embraced Bitcoin and Harris did not.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, because that's again, it's 48 million Americans, according to a recent survey, that say that they hold Bitcoin. Like if they're on the fence and they're like, man, I don't know, it could go either way on these two candidates. One is friendly toward this asset that I hold, and one isn't. Right. There's 48 million people, and probably a bunch of them were sitting on the fence, and that made the call for them.
I would absolutely agree with that. And let's shift here. This is a good point to start discussing, like, what would be next for the US. So I know that when you look at President Trump, I think not just with President Trump, but just in general with the Democrat versus Republican parties, Republicans tend to be a little bit more progressive when it comes to anything finance, commercial. Means pros and cons on both sides, because here we don't really pick sides. But from that perspective, I always wonder why do Democrats not did not engage the conversation on Bitcoin versus the U.S. and versus the Republicans being just not just with Bitcoin, but with some of the other digital currencies as well. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because Bitcoin is different things to different people, right? Mm-hmm. People are attracted to it for different reasons. I actually come at Bitcoin from, like, I at this point I don't really subscribe to Democrat, Republican, right, left, but but if gun to my head, I would say that I come at it from the left, right? Like, I come at it from an Occupy Wall Street type perspective rather than like libertarian perspective. Although I understand both, and I think there's merit to both of them. So I think that Republicans just got it quicker. And to be fair, there are Democrats that are lobbying for it. But then there's people like Elizabeth Warren who are so staunchly against Bitcoin that kind of like skews the perspective of other, to have some like high profile Democrats that are anti, I think that kind of skews the perspective. But I think and hope that this will become a universal issue, and Republicans and Democrats will each find different aspects of it that they want to champion, but there are aspects of it that each of them can champion. And, I think trying to stop Bitcoin at this point is trying to hold back the tide, right? Like that's the choice that politicians in the US have right now. Are we going to try to hold back the tide, or are we going to embrace it? And I think the ones that embrace that are going to do much better. And I think I'm hopeful that those that have been anti, and politicians, I'm not a big friend of, like, I didn't get into Bitcoin because I love politicians. I'll say that.
Right. It's almost revolutionary, though, in a lot of ways. Like when I hear you speak on Bitcoin, and when you say that, now being the skeptic that I am, when I was on business travel in the Midwest, and I happened to get an upgrade to first class. Yay! And so there were a lot of the the Congress people coming on board, and they were well known. I'm not going to give the name. He's since passed. Democrat from Detroit, and a Democrat, one of the senior leaders in the Republican parties from Detroit. It was one of the senators. And if I mention his name, you can do the research and know exactly what I'm talking about. And they were chatting it up. And they were like, oh, yeah, we're going to see you and the family for dinner. All right, I'll see you. And these people are friends. And I think that for me, it was just an epiphany. It was like, they're really all the same.
They are.
And that's why it bothers me so much, because the decisions they're making impact all of us, but they socialize together, they friendship together. And not that you want them to be enemies, because you want things to get done. But when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, it's such a racket, So anyway, I just feel that I'm not so sure the Democrats after this conversation are naive about Bitcoin. I think they may really know, and that's why they don't really want people to start using Bitcoin.
Yeah, it could be that as well, because Bitcoin, depending on how you use it, but if used correctly, Bitcoin empowers the individual. So there's actually a disincentive for some aspects of government to encourage Bitcoin, right?
Because if you have Bitcoin, then can people really track what you have for, like, it's almost like they can't really own you in a way. Because I feel like the government owns everyone. That's just my personal perspective. Whether people want to believe it or not, you are tracked at every moment.
Yep.
Your financials, your finances are tracked. You spending patterns, everything is being data. All the data is being collected. But if you own your own digital currency and you own your own Bitcoin, what you buy is between you and someone else. It's not, the government has no engagement.
Yes.
So how can they really charge taxes on you if they don't really know what you have?
Yeah. So it's funny. There's as you were saying that, I'm taking some notes. It brought up a thought for me that the way that the system is currently structured. So there's politicians, elected officials, and then there's citizens, right? Just individuals. The politicians have a lot of insight into our finances, and we have very little insight into their finances. With Bitcoin could flip that, and I think it should be flipped, right? Bitcoin has the ability, because the way that the blockchain works, it's transparent and it's pseudonymous. So if you want to be anonymous, you can. If you want to be very transparent, you also can. So it introduces the possibility that the individual could have more financial privacy, and elected officials, we could demand more accountability with their finances.
To see where their money is coming from.
So it could flip how things are now. And if you think about that, it's like, oh yeah, I get why maybe some wouldn't want that.
Yeah. Because
we should want that.
We should want that. And when I find out how much the government, like how much money the Democrats make versus their net worth, I'm like, what's making up the difference? With Bitcoin and transparency, we could demand that. Yes. Like, who's paying you?
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's why I think, and the Dems are just, I think with the Republicans, they are just out and blazing with their stuff, which to me, I kind of respect, because it's like, do something about it, right? And it puts it on the public to really challenge them and bring change. So it's like, if you don't like what I'm doing, do something about it. Where the Democrats, I feel sometimes they are more so like, oh, I'm just nice and friendly, but I'm really making all this money over there. I'm doing the same things that the Republicans are doing. I'm just packaging what I'm doing, or my profile or my brand a little different for the people, but am I really? Very interesting. Okay. So let's just shift here, because I don't want everybody, look, I don't want the government coming for me. But let's talk about Gen Zs and really why they have embraced Bitcoin in a way that their parents and their grandparents have not. Like, what are you really seeing with that? Like younger adults in their early 20s. And I know they tend to be a little bit more revolutionary than some of the, people in my age group, which kind of tend to play it safe.
Yeah. So I think the people who tend to get Bitcoin first are those who need it. The people who will get it last are those who are more or less well served by the status quo with finances. And I think the younger generation, like Gen Z, they're not well served, right? So the older generation, let's say boomers, they have, they had the ability to buy a house with, I'm making these numbers up, but it's a rough approximation, with 10,000 hours of minimum wage work. And now it takes 100,000 hours of minimum wage work, right? It's that sort of discrepancy. So those boomers now have houses, and the houses are going up in value. They're fine. They don't really need to change things. Like they're not like, oh, we gotta rethink things because this is unsustainable. They're fine. But Gen Z is like, wait, I'll never be able to afford a house. Like I'll never be able to do this. Like the system is broken. Like we need to look at alternatives, and Bitcoin is an alternative to that, right? It's a paradigm shift. It flips a lot of things on its head. And I think the younger generation is just a lot more incentivized to look to see if we could do better, where the older generation is comfortable, right? They're comfortable. Like, I know how things work now. I know how things work, and it could be better, but it more or less has worked out for me so far. So one interesting, anecdote to that is, so I run a Bitcoin education nonprofit, and we have a workbook, a Bitcoin diploma, which we teach to from say 15 years old and up, right?
Wow.
And so there'll be a 15-year-old and a 45-year-old in the same class.
I'm excited that you even have a 45-year-old.
It's often more difficult for the 45-year-old because they have to go through the process unlearning some of their long-held assumptions, whereas the 15-year-old doesn't.
I could see that.
Yeah,
I could see that. And what's typically the makeup, more male or female, if you don't mind me asking?
Of our students, or just like
of your students over the age of, let's say, 25?
So ours now, but not that much. Like if you go to a Bitcoin conference, it doesn't lean male. It's heavily male. I'll say 90-10. It's male if you go to a Bitcoin conference. Our students are probably more 60-40. So it still is a majority male, but it's not as massive a majority as you might think if you just went to a conference or, logged onto Twitter and read what people were saying about Bitcoin.
Huh. And so do you think that's changing more as time goes? Like, do you think, like, let's say our children's, we're alpha, our children, I think, are generation alpha. Do you think they will just be solely on Bitcoin, or do you think we'll still have some kind of regular dollar currency or whatever currency wherever you're from?
So my first son will turn 2 this week, and my second one is likely to be born in the next few days. And I am pretty sure that they will grow up and use only Bitcoin. They won't use dollars. They won't use euros. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And now, is that just because you're in El Salvador, or you think that's just globally?
A little bit of both. Okay. I think it's easier in some places than others, but some places will be earlier to it than others, but everyone will get there eventually. It is objectively speaking a harder money, like a harder asset, meaning like it has better monetary properties. And on a long enough timeline, I think that the entire world transitions to harder money rather than, transitions to rules rather than rulers.
I think that's why the early adoption with men is so, like, I kind of think like that in a lot of ways, how some men think, where it's more pragmatic and less emotional. And I could see that being the case for Bitcoin as well. So let's transition here to talk about something that I'm really interested in now, what's going on in Africa and some of the other underdeveloped countries that are now becoming slowly but surely becoming very powerful in the global landscape. How is Bitcoin what role will Bitcoin play in their currency? Like looking at countries that are really developing. And I just say Africa because Africa is one of the countries that most people talk about. India, of course, the BRIC countries. How do you feel about that? Like, what are you seeing in some of those other countries? And is the U.S. more so? Because I feel like El Salvador is very progressive in a lot of ways. How do you feel about the U.S. compared to us in the U.S. not adopting Bitcoin or being as aggressive about adopting Bitcoin as some of the other countries?
Yeah. So I think at a grassroots level, just like individuals that are using Bitcoin. I think that it already has and will continue to grow faster in developing countries like in Africa than it will in the US because they need it more, right? So
that
inflation
that you were talking about. Okay, got you.
Yeah. So as bad as the inflation, I mean, nobody likes inflation, right? Like any inflation is just your money becomes less valuable with time. And in the US, it's it's relatively low. It's single digits per year, right? In a lot of African countries, it's double, possibly triple digits per year, right? So that's a terrible store of value. If your money is worth half as much
oh my God.
in a year or 10 years.
Wow.
This is a really important shift with Bitcoin. It shifts your mentality from a spending mentality to a saving mentality because inflation makes us want to get rid of our money quickly, right? Either to spend it on, go to the grocery store and spend it on things that you need in the present, or to turn it into something that's going to hold the value better, like maybe you buy a house or something like that. But you don't want to hold dollars, right? You don't want to hold your government currency because if there's one certainty in life, it's that it will be worth less in the future than it is today.
Correct.
So you want to get rid of it. It incentivizes spending. Bitcoin does the opposite. Bitcoin incentivizes saving. It makes you think like, okay, well, I need the groceries. So I'm still going to buy the groceries because I need to eat, right? But like some of these more, optional items that they'd be nice to have. I don't really need it though. You might defer that into the future. So it switches our mentality from a spending mentality to a saving mentality. And that's actually what I'm most excited about with Bitcoin is that mental shift to look further into the future. I think that has tremendously positive second and third order effects.
That is incredible because I could definitely see that happening. How would I go about, let's talk about, shift the conversation a little bit. So now I'm interested in starting at least the conversation, or I'm intrigued. What would be the first step for someone who's interested in maybe pursuing Bitcoin as a mode of currency or just to learn more? Whether taking your course, is that online? Is it available for everyone?
Yes. So everything that we do is free and open source.
Really?
Yeah. So this, I've got a little visual aid here. This is the Bitcoin diploma. This is kind of our flagship product. We work with educators in 40 countries around the world, including a variety of educators in the US. It's translated into 20 or 30 languages at this point. We also have intro classes. We have everything that we do is targeted at people who are brand new to Bitcoin. So it gives a base layer of financial literacy, and then we talk about Bitcoin, and that's free. There's classes in person depending on where you are, or everywhere. There's classes online, and you can find out more about that at our website, which is myfirstbitcoin.io. And besides us, we are the largest Bitcoin education nonprofit in the world, but besides us, there's a ton of Bitcoin education resources. You could just search on YouTube or a variety of other places. Some exchanges, I know Coinbase is big in the US, and they have a program. I think this is actually common. I think most exchanges in the US have this now, where they have some sort of educational materials that come with it. I would caveat that a little bit in that exchanges have their own incentives. Everybody has their own incentives. Exchanges want you to trade. That's how they make money. So they want you to trade from coin A to coin B to coin C, back to coin A. So just take that with a grain of salt with everything, right? Everybody has incentives. We have tried to develop our program at My First Bitcoin in a way that aligns the incentives to best serve the student. We don't take we're entirely funded by the community. So we're by the community for the community. We don't take money from governments. We don't take money from exchanges, from corporations, because they all have incentives and they would all try to steer us in a certain direction. We want to be captured by the interests of the community, by the interests of the individual new to the space. And we are. So I'm biased, but we're a great resource, but there's tons of other resources out there.
You sure you don't want to come back to the U.S. and run for office?
I might come back to the U.S., but I will not run for office.
Oh my God, we need more people like you, for the people, by the people. Oh my goodness. So, okay, so if I wanted to, so do I have to go through an exchange in order to purchase Bitcoin?
No. Okay. Many people do. There's a few ways that you could get Bitcoin. So, you could sign up on an exchange and link it with your bank account and send dollars and buy Bitcoin. You can also do peer-to-peer trading. I don't actually know what that looks like in the US at the moment. I know in the past I used a website called Local Bitcoins, but that's not in service anymore. I don't know what the peer-to-peer landscape looks like in the US now. So peer-to-peer is just individual to individual, right? Without having the exchange.
So is it like a PayPal, but for Bitcoin?
Yeah, something like that. And then the third way is you can earn it, right? So if you have a business, if you have a side hustle, accept Bitcoin as payment. And not only is that a way for you to accumulate Bitcoin, it also, depending on what that business or side hustle is, it's also pretty advantageous if you do any international work, if you want to accept international payments, because it's the same. Bitcoin is borderless. If you're in the US, or if you're in Nigeria or India or China or Europe, it is exactly the same for everyone. It is just as easy for me to send Bitcoin from someone sitting across the table from me here in the same country or someone across the world.
Wow. So it's universal and the value is the same. It doesn't change. Like the currency in the US is different based on the pound or the euro, wherever you are, the yen.
Right.
Interesting. Well, you just said right there why people don't want everybody using Bitcoin. So let's talk a little bit, shift and talk about the safety of Bitcoin. Like, how do I not get hacked? And these for me, because this is all new for me, it's very novice question. So how do I guarantee the safety of my Bitcoin? How do I ensure, like, where do I hold the Bitcoin?
Right. So one of the great things about
this is so exciting.
So probably the most common way that people get their first Bitcoin is to buy it on an exchange, and maybe they keep it there. But the exchange could get hacked. There's counterparty risk, right? Okay. It's not likely to happen, but it's not 100%, right? There's always risk. So what I do, and this is the opposite end of the spectrum, is I have all my Bitcoin in something called self-custody, right? So I control it, I own it. So it could be a device. It's like a USB that has all the information needed to access my wallet. It's password protected, and I plug it into, my laptop, and it's on that device. I hold it. If anything happens to it, it's because I made a mistake, not because somebody else did. Whereas if it's on an exchange and it gets hacked, then, you might have done everything right, but maybe the exchange did something wrong. Again, this is very unlikely. A lot of exchanges will probably have some sort of insurance and some like remedy for that, but there is some risk there. There's also risk for self-custody, right? So this is very different from how the world works today, because how the world works today is the individual does not have a lot of control in their own life. Mm-hmm. So if you forget the password to your bank account, you could reset it. If you lose your card, they could issue you a new one. The reason why they could with self-custody Bitcoin, you can't. And so on the surface, that sounds scary, and it is, right?
Yes, for someone like me. Oh my God.
But if you take a step back and you think about like why that is the case, then Bitcoin starts to sound revolutionary. So the reason why you won't lose access to your bank account is because somebody else has control over it, right? Somebody else has access to it.
Right.
And that access also means that somebody could tell your bank, and in the case of Bitcoin, the exchange, to freeze it, right? It's like, oh, they didn't pay their taxes, they donated to the wrong organization, whatever it is, freeze their account, right? Because somebody else has that control over it. Whereas with Bitcoin, no one does. So it's kind of like with that responsibility comes with that power comes responsibility, right?
So literally all my money could be in this makeshift lipstick tube device.
All to the extreme, all your money could be in your head, right? So you could memorize it. You could memorize like how to get access to it. That's not recommended because that's easier to hack. What we memorize is easier to guess for like a brute force hacking. So you shouldn't do that, but you could. But there's the way that best practices for self-custody, like how I have it. So I have access. So say I have this device that I plug in, and that allows me to access my Bitcoin to spend it, to send it out. What I have done and what you should do is so if you do that, if that's all you do, just put it on this device and you lose the device and you forget your password, it's gone and no one can help you. No one else has access to it. What I do, and this is something that gets better with time, easier with time, is there's something called a seed phrase, which is effectively it's a string of 24 words. And it is a backup, right? So you can restore your wallet. You lose it, you forget the password, whatever it is. If you have this list of 24 words, then you could restore it. So you keep that someplace safe, right? And maybe you divide it into two parts, right? So it's not all in the same place. And you give one to somebody that you trust, and you keep half. So even if, or you do like two of three, like
husband and wife. The husband would keep the first 6. And the wife would keep the second. Okay.
Yeah, something like that. And then if you lose the device, you lose it, it gets stolen, whatever it is, then you have that backup. However, if you self-custody your Bitcoin and you did not back it up, and then you make a mistake, you lose the device, then you're in trouble. So there's a lot of power, but then there's a lot of responsibility. And this is the sort of thing that with time is getting easier and easier, because there are many entrepreneurs and innovators that recognize this as an issue and they're trying to solve that. So for example, there's I haven't used this, but Block, which is it's a publicly traded company. They used to be called Square. So they do like payment apps and stuff like that. I think last year they came out with a wallet, which is it's a multi-sig, so you need 2 of 3 people to sign it, right?
Oh,
and I might be getting some of these details wrong, but the general concept.
But this is good though. I'll feel a little bit more comfortable with that.
The general concept is they have a key, so you need 2 of 3 keys. They have a key, you have a key, and like some other person has a key. So if you lose your key, you could still get access. You could be like, hey, I lost my key, and I verified that it's me. So, you have a key and you have a key, so let's put them together. But they can't access it because they only have one key. So you need to tell both those parties to access it, or one of them if you lose it and you need it. So again, I think I probably got some of the details wrong, but the point is that it has been recognized that this is a barrier to entry to new people entering the space. And with time, things are getting easier and better, where you still retain that power, where nobody could freeze your funds, nobody controls it except for you, but it makes it a little bit easier to do it. And that every year will get easier and easier.
Yeah, because think about the password too to get in. you can't use like 1, 2, 3, 2026. You got to come up. And, people can barely remember phone numbers now, if there's because everything's programmed in the cell phone. And I'm like, wow, but that's great. Okay, so people are looking at solutions as more people start to adopt.
And Bitcoin is a journey. You won't, on day one, you won't do it all. You won't be able to do it all. You won't be able to use it to its maximum potential. It's a journey, right? You'll get it. You'll learn a little bit more, get a little bit more comfortable, take one step further towards complete control and sovereignty, and one step away from relying on third parties and relying on others for your money and your power. So it's a journey, and you don't have to, and you never actually arrive at the destination, right? Because there's always, it's such a powerful tool that there's always more that you could do with it.
So let's shift here to talk a little bit about the final 3 things, but I feel like we've kind of gotten to the point where we did the backdrop on what Bitcoin is, how Generation Z is using it, who were the early adopters, what the audience looks like. I want to talk a little bit about 3 things. One, how people are using AI with Bitcoin, if that's possible. Is there going to be a need for traditional banking? Like, what's going to happen to Wells Fargo and some of these other banking industries if, completely people start to adopt Bitcoin, because you don't really need them as much anymore? And then 3, like, what corporations are using Bitcoin, just like a Nestle, Procter & Gamble? What are some of the companies and things that you've seen? And it's just conversational, right? So if you don't, I like the podcast to be more conversational, to be rehearsed, because I feel like people get more out of it, and it fosters discussion on their own with their friends as well. So just pick one and just give me your thoughts on AI with Bitcoin, what companies are starting to use Bitcoin in a way, whether it's in El Salvador or in the US, that you really think like, okay, they're onto something here, and they've started to make the adjustments either through a payment system or how they're paying their vendors or accounts receivables, just any way that you can think of that you think is a model.
Yeah. So for AI, I think the conversion of AI and Bitcoin is going to be really interesting, because AI doesn't have any biases, right? So to go back to the earlier point about the 15-year-old and the 45-year-old, the reason why it's more difficult for the 45-year-old to grasp Bitcoin is because they have inherent biases that they picked up, right? AI won't. AI will look at it very objectively. What makes more sense? What is more logical? So I think AI will choose Bitcoin.
Wow, that's so interesting.
So they'll need to interact with each other in the future, right? AI will have to talk to each other.
That's so interesting.
Some value exchange, and what current where the rules change depending on this small opaque group, or where the rules are set and they're logical and predictable. AI is going to use the second one, right? So I think it's going to be really interesting when AI picks up and starts to really embrace Bitcoin. And traditional banking, so yes, it is going to hurt traditional banking, especially the ones that are slower to adapt to it. So there will be, again, going back to custody, there are services that the bank could still provide. They could provide custody of your bit. They don't currently, but in the future, maybe they could provide custody. You have that optionality. I won't use it. I want to have complete control over my Bitcoin. But many people will, and they'll have some hybrid system where it's like they have a little bit less control, you have a little bit more. I don't know exactly how it will come to fruition, but they'll create services and products for you to use their infrastructure, their bank, for you to use Bitcoin. Some will embrace that faster than others, and those will be the ones that will probably grow, and the ones that are slow to embrace it will probably die off. And then
That's very concerning, though, because essentially, if you had, and this is just me talking as a novice, if you have AI, do you really need a bank? Because I don't know about you, but I don't trust the bank to hold my digital currency. I wouldn't trust the bank to have custody over my Bitcoin, knowing that essentially, if we even had a 50% adoption where people would just completely do Bitcoin and not do a dollar or any kind of currency, the banking industry, we know with President Obama, he bailed out the banks, right? So that's the infrastructure of the U.S. It would essentially bankrupt, destroy the U.S. I wouldn't trust the U.S., the banking system, to even anywhere near that process.
No, and to go back to, the start of the conversation with what first caught my attention with Bitcoin was in Cyprus, the government went into your bank account and took money out. And then there's other examples, right? That's not an outlier. That the Canadian trucker protest, what was that, 2022, I guess? People who donated to that, they had their bank accounts frozen, right? I know, me personally, I was living in Ecuador, and it's a whole long story, but there was a revolution. I got caught up in it. I got deported, and they seized all my assets, right? I had a bank account there, and they took all the money from my bank account. Like, these are edge cases, but they're edge cases that happen everywhere and will happen with greater frequency. As that system becomes more unstable, it will become more aggressive towards its users. And Bitcoin is the lifeboat. Bitcoin is the escape hatch. And actually having a lifeboat and an escape hatch will accelerate it. So things are going to start to accelerate now.
Oh, wow. This is so what company do you think has done a great job with Bitcoin? Whether in any way you would recommend or you could see? Like Fortune 500, like an enterprise company.
Okay, so the example that I was thinking of was more for individual rather than a company. But let me give that, and then I'll try to think of a company. So I have a friend. He's Indian, and he is a web developer. So he mostly develops websites for websites outside of India, right? And it is problematic for him to accept payment. It's at best there's parties in between his employer and him that are taking a cut, right? There's regulations that make it difficult, maybe impossible, depending on the country. And at best, somebody is taking a slice of that, right? Somebody is taking a slice of it, and their policies might change at any time, and maybe the slice will be bigger, or maybe they just won't let you do that anymore. He started to accept Bitcoin, and it made his business, and he works with, a team. It made his business so much easier and more profitable. More profitable because people aren't taking a cut, but also because it opened up new avenues, right? There was this friction before where there was some percent of his energy of the administration that went to just figuring out the logistics of payments.
I know that.
Now it's just about the work, right? And I think it's really interesting that it's much easier to think of an example of Bitcoin benefiting the individual than it is to think of Bitcoin benefiting a large corporation. And I think that's probably why I like Bitcoin so much, right? Because it inverts the traditional power structure.
For sure. Oh my goodness, this has been amazing. And so if I wanted to start Bitcoin, the first thing I'm going to do is sign up for your class, and we'll drop in the description how people can contact you and get engaged. And any parting words, anything you would like to share before we finish up, John? I'm feeling more empowered, so I won't part ways when I have those conversations at networking events. I can speak a little bit more intelligently now based on what I know.
It's amazing. Yes. Just a parting thought. we create our own future, right? We do not have to be subservient to others, to third parties, to governments. We could dictate what our future looks like. And Bitcoin is one of the tools that lets us do that. So if we want a better world, we shouldn't rely on anyone else to do it. We should create it ourselves.
I couldn't have said that more or better. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate the conversation. We'll be sure to let everyone know how to reach you, how to get in touch with you. I'm super excited because I think most people don't really know where to start and what the process is. I think you've given us a lot of good information here, where I would tell people and challenge the listeners and the viewers to just take the first step, do the course, or at least figure out where they can start to set up their Bitcoin. I found that once you take the first difficult step of setting something up to just get started, the journey, as you say, is easier. But I feel like so many people are just paralyzed because they don't take the first step. When I first started investing in the market, the first thing I did was I spent $100. And then I said, you know what? I'm just going to spend $100. And then it gave me a little bit more confidence. I set the account up, and then every week I would just spend like an hour. And I think based on what I'm seeing with Bitcoin, based on what's happening in the world, we're not in I think a lot of people will love to think that in the US in particular, that it's all about the US. We are in a global economy, a global world now, and things are shifting, and they're shifting very fast. And just based on what I'm seeing with the banks, based on the hacking, I get so many alerts from the dark web of accounts being hacked, passwords being hacked. I just don't have confidence as like I used to. And so I want to learn more and know more as well. And I know my listeners do. So thank you so much for taking the time. I feel empowered, which is what you said, the word that stuck with me. And I'm praying that other people follow suit. So thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day.